Alors, merci, Stephen. Et, premièrement, je dois vous remercier pour votre discours inspirant. Et je pense que nous sommes tous d'accord qu'il y a un air prometteur à ce moment, mais il reste encore des grands défis et des obligations pour notre fédération, pour notre communauté, surtout de mieux assurer la résonance de notre voix collective au plan politique et même avec le grand public. Alors, so please join me first of all in thanking Stephen for a very visionary address, an inspiring address, identifying some clear priorities for the Federation and for our community going forward. Thank you, Stephen. It's a great pleasure for me to be sitting here with this trio of colleagues joined in one way or another by our commitment to the Federation over time. And let me just introduce them, although I'm sure for most people in the room, introductions aren't really necessary. But first, Roseanne Runte, the past president of our organization from 1982 to 1984, who, as I'm sure you all know, is currently president and vice chancellor of Carleton University, previously served comme la rectrice de l'Université Sainte-Anne, principal of Glendon College, president of Victoria University and Old Dominion University. To the far right is Don Fisher, who was past president from 2004 to 2006, is currently the acting principal of Green College at the University of British Columbia, and the author of The Social Sciences in Canada, 50 Years of National Activity by the Social Science Federation of Canada. And to my immediate right, of course, my longtime partner in crime, Noreen Golfman, past president of the Federation from 2007 to 11, who is currently the provost and vice president academic at Memorial University, where she previously served as Dean of Graduate Studies from 2008 to 2014. So please join me in welcoming the panelists. So we are going to spend a bit of time talking about the past of the Federation and some of the issues that we addressed as leaders of the Federation, that the organization addressed over time. But we also want to turn the conversation looking forward as we move through the discussion as well. And Stephen will join us later for a question and answer session. So let's begin with Stephen identified some of the challenges that he sees facing the Federation today. A logical starting point, I think, is to ask the panelists what they saw as the leading challenges that they encountered and experienced during their time as leaders of the organization. Roseanne, could I start with you?
Okay. So thinking back, I recall 4 major challenges. The first one was the public said humanities weren't useful, and we spent an inordinate amount of time trying to prove our utility. That word has morphed into relevance, but same story. And if it makes anybody feel happy or take comfort, back in the 16th century, Bonaventure de Perrier wrote about the utility of the humanities and about the sloppy bad students at universities who had too easy a life. So, you know, it's been going on for centuries, and if we take any comfort, it will still go on, and we'll still be here fighting that same battle in a few years. The second issue is one that probably doesn't exist anymore today. It was the humanities versus the social sciences. As a humanist, we've sometimes felt that we were overwhelmed by the social sciences, outnumbered by the social sciences, and more favored in the government by the social sciences than the humanities. I think that today that's pretty well gone, but I would say that it's now the community colleges versus the universities, and that is the struggle. And, you know, external people and governments always look for fissures in the thing. So I think well, the humanities and social sciences came together and we worked together. We've got to do that a little bit with the community colleges. And I see that same fissure in the universities where you have the U15 versus the other universities. We've got to come together on one agenda where we all work, we all support research, whether we're big or small. Third issue was government interference in our grants. It took us by surprise. The regular grants that they gave us to fund research had always been free. Anybody could apply for anything, and suddenly the government announced that they would be tied to themes. And there were 4 themes. And if you didn't fit in the 4 themes, you wouldn't be able to apply for a grant. And as a humanist scholar, I remember thinking to myself, well, the only theme that possibly could, where I could possibly do something was in the aging population. And I could talk about old men in Shakespeare and Racine. I then went, we started a huge lobbying effort to overturn that. My big lesson from that was that it's a lot easier to change it before it happens than after it happens. Tom Simons was a great mentor and help to me, and we were not able to reverse the whole thing, but we did get the government to restore free grants and free research, but they still had some themes. So it was a saw-off. The last one was there was less money, and the Aid to Scholarly Publications program was reduced. And what did we do? We learned to work with others. We got the publishers out there lobbying with us. We increased the number of supporters that we had to persuade governments that it was important to invest in research. And I suspect that the same issues of funding and of dirigisme exist a little bit today, sunshine aside.
Thanks, Roseanne. I suspect you're right that there is a theme emerging here. Dawn, over to you.
Well, it does seem to me that the issues that faced the councils in 1940 and 1943, that's the social sciences and the Humanities Council, the issues of coordination across disciplines, the issue of representation, and the issue of independence are still with us and will continue to be a focus of what we do. The representation, of course, we struggle across region and across universities, across disciplines. The coordination, I think, has morphed, though, and quite properly so, into a focus on interdisciplinarity, and this echoes what Stephen was saying in his remarks. It does seem to me that, well, historically, interdisciplinarity becomes part of what we said we were about in 1968. Prior to that, coordination was the term that was used. There's been, I would suggest, increasing emphasis on interdisciplinarity since that time, and indeed that became a founding principle for SSHRC when it was created in 76, 77. But I think we're at the stage where that emphasis should be increased. Again, I reckon what Stephen said, and I think we should be focusing on what one recent book by Harvey Graff has labelled it as interdisciplines. So rather than focusing on interdisciplinarity itself, I suggest that what we ought to be doing, as our Constitution says, by the way, sponsoring, encouraging the development of interdisciplines that are focused on the key issues that face us today. Just as in the 1940s, the focus was on the social problems that faced our society then. So key issues, of course, sustainability, climate change. And to do that work means that it clearly means that we can demonstrate our relevance, which is always an ongoing problem. But it means that we can say to this new government, and in our strategic plan, we can focus specifically on the ways in which we can contribute to the well-being of our society. Finally then, independence. I mean, it is a continuing issue. I'm reminded of Harold Innis's wonderful sort of dogmatic stance as the council is being formed. He resigned. He was about, well, he actually did have a letter of resignation on file saying that he wouldn't be a member of the council, which was, of course, would have scuttled the whole idea because he was the linchpin to everything. And the reason he did that is because there was some suggestion that the council might, as he put it, in quotes, collaborate with government. I mean, it's absolutely, it was critical at that point that this council would be an independent body of researchers that had no relationship at all with government. And indeed, that view extended not just to collaboration, or the lack of collaboration, but also extended to the fact that the informal rule for the first 20 years or more of the two councils' activity was that administrators, that's presidents, deans, even heads of department, were not allowed to hold office. So there's very much a sort of sense in which the focus on producing and maintaining a clear independence from what might be called management, government, anything that might interfere with the, in quote, purity of research. Of course, that's not the case now, and a key challenge that we faced, and we still do face, it seems to me, is the emergence in the last decade or so of the increasing emphasis on impact, on producing knowledge that I would call policy knowledge, knowledge that has to be seen to be contributing in some direct, practical way to our society, and that's clearly in tension with the some of the founding principles of the Federation.
Thanks, Don. I think we'll come back to the question of impact a little later on, but I want to give Noreen an opportunity to provide some of her reflections on the time that she was heading the Federation.
Well, I echo, of course, what we've been saying here, and especially what Stephen highlighted as the challenges of the Federation. When I became president, I really focused on two major themes: internal communications and external. And the internal was, and it probably remains, a big challenge in sustaining momentum and engagement in the Federation. I just had to recall my own experience somehow, without really knowing how I was being directed to the Federation and its interests. As a younger scholar, coming to an understanding of what the hell the Federation was. And I think this is an ongoing challenge. The conflation with shirk, people assumed and still assume, certainly younger scholars, that we're the same thing. We're cousins, we're not the same. We're part of a family, but we're related, but distantly. And that challenge was very present because of the threat of associations pulling out, because of membership decline. So it seemed a very, very big communication challenge, how to engage members, and really at two levels, at the society, the association level, and in particular with institutions, because there was a sense that the institutional engagement was tepid, and how to make sure, that the representatives of the universities, who many of you are here today, so you're already engaged, but those who are not, or those who came to annual meetings or to Congress as an opportunity to visit Canada and not really participate in Federation events, how to hook those people in. and the other was the external. It seemed to me, it seemed to us at the time, the staff and the leadership team, that the default voice or voices for our issue sets were either Shirk, who was really constrained and could not really speak because they're an arm of government and all kinds of problems there, especially under a Harper government, but otherwise CAUT or Universities Canada, what was AUCC. And the Federation wasn't the go-to place to talk about, to respond to issues or to talk about post-secondary education, in particular humanities and social sciences, how to do that. And partly because of my own experience in media, working with the CBC, I had this notion that I could somehow bridge that big gap and worked very hard to do that. Not easy. We embedded reporters at Congress. We did whatever we could to feed information. I think this still remains a challenge. And it's part of the bigger challenge of defining and branding what the Federation is. We've seen today, we've seen this morning, the video, everybody's here for a purpose. It's long-standing relevance to the community, but you can't take it for granted. And we're bringing in new hires into our universities and how to educate those people about the value of what we do. The phrase public engagement wasn't current at all. Engagement, yes, but not the public piece of it. And it seems to me it's an extension of the kind of challenge that we really, really felt. I don't know how successful we were. I think we're here to celebrate 75 years. I think those challenges remain rather profound. I remember the struggle even to get, no offense to anybody here who might be from McGill, where I also was an undergraduate, just to get McGill to pay its dues every year. It was at that level. To keep, again, no offense intended, the Political Science Association engaged with the Federation. Some of these challenges probably still remain, especially as universities eye their spending every year and weigh the value of their subscriptions and connections with other associations and larger bodies. It seems that that's an ongoing challenge for the Federation, aside from all the other good work that we do. We had dreamt for years and still had not really fully achieved the notion of a passport at Congress. That consumed a lot of our time. How to make more fluid, and this speaks to the interdisciplinary challenge, our association work. We were promoting constantly the need to open up our association meetings to others and to do much more cross-fertilization of our programs. And I think we did a measure of that. We still have a long way to go. Later, perhaps, we'll talk about the larger institutional challenges facing those of us who promote interdisciplinarity or cross-disciplinarity. Seems to me it's not the Federation that's a stumbling block, or it's not our discourse that is, it's the institutional units that are still guarding very carefully their disciplinary basis for all kinds of traditional and some very practical and economic reasons. But that's where we have to put our energy. So I'll pause there in hope that we take that back.
So maybe I can just pick up on that and turn the question back to the panel as a whole. When we think about the internal community of the Federation, what is it exactly that we're thinking about? The Federation has changed. It's an organization that's a result of a merger. It has dozens and dozens of associations, scholarly associations, which comprise its membership, representing arts, humanities, and social science scholars and students across the country. But it also has more than 80 universities and colleges that are members as well. So I'd be interested to hear some of Roseanne and Dawn's reflections as well about the challenges or the experiences that you faced at the time in trying to rally the community, identify the community perhaps, and achieve that notion of collective voice that Stephen referenced earlier.
do want to say that one of the things that we've not been, excuse me, not been very good at doing, and we must improve. This federation and the Congress are unique institutions. I mean, enormously special, unique institutions. There's no other country in the OECD or no other country in the world, as far as I know, that has the equivalent of the Federation and the Congress. We struggled then, and I think we continue to struggle, to, one, let our own membership know that's the case and know how special it is. But as important, we still struggle to let government know how important it is and how special it is. So it seems to me that's something that we must continue to work on. The engagement issue that Noreen brought up is such a continuing one. I mean, as president in my own department, in my own university, I would be continually faced with the distance that individuals felt from the Federation. The place where I think it is least the case and the most promising place for creating engagement is, of course, the Congress. It's the place where we as individuals often talk to our colleagues that we see back at the university, our own university. We talk to them there in a way we haven't done at home. We see colleagues across disciplines. So, and we see colleagues in our disciplines from across the country. So it becomes this wonderful place where we have conversations, and of course lifetime friendships develop. I mean, all of you have had the experience, I'm sure, as you're there signing in, registering at Congress, and people are rushing over and hugging each other, and they haven't probably seen each other often for a whole year, and it becomes a place where friendships and disciplines and interdisciplines are renewed. So I think that we should continue to put more effort into engaging our membership, particularly through Congress. And I don't know if it still occurs, but when I was president, and at that point, before that I was vice president, and part of my responsibility was to work Congress, literally to work Congress. Then, and I hope it still continues, the executive, one member of the executive went to all of the, now it's 85, all of the annual general meetings that usually occur at the Congress, spoke to the associations about the work of the Federation, and did all we could to decrease that gap. So that's just one example, I think, of how we could continue to engage internally, but engage externally with government and impress how special and important the Federation and the Congress is.
Well, as educators, it is not surprising that we have to take on that role as educators outside the classroom as well as inside the classroom. But I must admit that I was a little naive. You know, you sort of feel like you gave that lecture last year and they should still know the answer. You have to keep giving the talk, and you have to keep telling everybody, both internally and externally, what we're about, and repeating that lesson. And I remember as president, it was the first time I ever went lobbying on the Hill to talk to our representatives about the importance of what we do. And you know, they didn't think a young twerp with blonde hair was probably very important, and so they let me sit in their office for a half hour before they deigned to show up for the appointment. And you know, I got to see bookshelves that were all cardboard books. There wasn't a real book among the whole bookshelf. I was kind of horrified that you know, that people would not have actually read books and have populated their shelves with fake books. But it was even more horrifying when I looked at the wastebasket. I mean, I got really bored. I looked at the wastebasket and I saw in the wastebasket, thrown obviously untouched and read, the report on the status of women and the role of women in academics in Canada by a member of our government. okay, a few years ago. But it reminded, reminiscing about those things reminds me that they're not bad people. It was a big report. It was really thick. They had probably no idea that there was really a problem. They maybe never ever met a woman they didn't know what a humanist was. It was my job to talk to them and explain it in a really nice way. And so, I can the word lobbying and say we're educators and we have to educate the world as to what we do. And if we hear people saying that we're not relevant, to me, it's my teaching evaluation. I didn't do a good enough job. We've got to keep at it.
Well, whether we call it lobbying or advocacy or engagement, the political piece clearly matters a lot for not just the Federation, but for academic life generally in Canada. And maybe we could shift the conversation a little bit now and focus on that political piece. It's a momentous time right now in Ottawa. However, things do change over time. And the Federation, I think, for many, many years, as we saw from the video, has been actively reaching out on Parliament Hill and with parliamentarians to try and communicate what the work of the Federation is. Noreen, I know you were very actively involved in that through some difficult moments.
Yeah, very difficult. For the first 2 years, we were politely allowed into the Tories especially. It was easy getting an audience with the opposition parties, to say the least. Very encouraging and supportive, but as the Conservative government started to dominate the House, we had fewer and fewer meetings. And in the last 2 years of my presidency, we couldn't even get into the door. Just really gave up on the lobbying or educating piece because it just wasn't worth trying to make those appointments, and we just couldn't get them. I vividly remember a number of them in the first few years where there were not necessarily paper books, but you could tell who the MP was interested in or what he was like, as you can from what his desk looks like, what's on the wall, lots of hockey pictures. I will never forget James Rajat was plastered his office with hockey. We talked about hockey a lot. I'm from Montreal. I could talk hockey. But we never were getting to where we wanted to go. It was really, really maddening. I would like to think things have changed. We have a drama teacher as a prime minister, comes out of our world, and is at least responding, I think, to what is, I think, fair to say, a hunger among us as a country to not only look progressive, but be progressive, and to engage in the kind of social and people-centered work that we do and we promote. And the language has shifted so quickly in only 2 weeks that it can't help but give one some hope that we will at least have an audience for what we're about. The promise to restore funding to public institutions such as the CBC, to telefilm, and one would hope by extension the tri-agencies would suggest that we are moving into, indeed, a kind of sunnier moment here, notwithstanding budget challenges and everything else that politics will bring upon and to this current government. But I do think it's an opportunity the Federation has to seize very quickly and to be bold in its conversations with the government that will not only book appointments, but allow us time to talk about what we're all about. But to go back to Roseanne's point, we do have to re-educate all the time, and we'll have a new group of people who will never have heard of the Federation. I remember my husband, who used to work for Bob Ray for his sins in those days in the 90s, took me to a friend's house who we used to work with, very, very highly positioned official by that point in the federal government. And we had dinner in Ottawa, and I had been at a Federation AGM as, I think, a board member or a vice president at that time. And Stephen, my husband, introduced me to this guy, And he said, oh, what were you doing in Ottawa? And I said, well, I was at the Federation AGM, thinking this guy actually knew what the Federation was. Afterwards, Stephen pulled me aside and said, nobody knows what the Federation is in Ottawa, nobody. If they even know about Shirk, I think they do now. But so that was a rude awakening to me. And again, go back to my point again about education at all fronts, but particularly now, I think we do have a moment to seize. Chad and I used to meet, in a phone booth, covered to have a talk when he was president. We had a fabulous collaboration. Really important part of my presidency was being able to talk, however secretly or secretively with Chad, because we were not even allowed to be seen to be communicating with each other. Because to go back to former President Pat Clement's line, Shirk was a voice of government and we were of the people, and government couldn't be seen to be talking to the people. Again, I hope that's changed.
Well, there are a lot of organizations obviously trying to get the year of government, and especially right now the briefing books are flying and people are trying to get appointments. So perhaps one of the elements around the government relations piece goes back to something which Tom mentioned earlier, which is the whole discourse around impact and relevance and values, and what is the value proposition, to put it in that awkward phrase, for the Federation, and how's that changed over time, do you think?
Before we do that, Graham, just let me stay with the new government for a moment. And of course, Justin is a graduate of UBC and the Faculty of Education, where I'm part of, and so the drama teacher. But it does seem to me this is a tremendous opportunity, and again, Stephen was talking about that. I want to go back, given my interest in the history of interdisciplinarity and the Federation. In 1964, another Liberal government was in power, and the two councils at that point lobbied hard. This is in the run-up, by the way, to the creation of the Science Council. Some of you will remember that body. And in the run-up to that, it was clear that the government was indeed going to appoint a science officer. But it was also clear that that science officer would only be concerned with the natural sciences. The councils lobbied hard. Of course, they weren't successful, but they lobbied hard for a human sciences officer, a parallel office. It does seem to me that is something that we could try again with this current government. And I would want to go even further. I think there's, it's an amazing thing that we have a federal government that's involved in so many ways, particularly on the research side, with our universities and with our communities, both directly and indirectly, and yet there's no minister. There's no ministry at the federal level. And of course we know about the constitutional divide, and we know the history of those problems, and particularly the sensitivity around Quebec and Quebec exceptionalism. But really, it is time, it does seem to me, for us in this knowledge society, for us to be lobbying alongside universities, Canada as it now is, for a minister of learning and research, a ministry of learning and research, and within which there would be two science officers, one for the natural sciences and one for the human sciences. I think it's an amazing opportunity, and I hope we're able to grasp some of that so that it becomes institutionalized rather than something that will simply pass and the opportunity will be gone. I'm sorry, Graham, I didn't address your impact thing.
That's all right, that's all right. So it's given Roseanne a little more time to think about that question.
Well, maybe I should start off by saying thank you to all the past presidents and the past staffs, and thank Chad for his leadership, and thanks Stephen for his great thoughts and his forward-moving thinking. I think we have to indeed find pathways, find ways to demonstrate our relevance and utility. But I think that the key to all of this is to know in our hearts that what we are doing is valuable, that we are valuable, and that what we're doing is going to make a strong impact on the world. And if we look at internationalization, but pick the rest of the world as our allies and become an international movement, that's very important. If we look at interdisciplinarity or interdisciplines, that is also very important. Science is doing the same thing. Technology is doing the same thing. Technology is a little bit your information society thing, which is really important, the effects of technology on life, the use of technology in producing arts and so on is the three really important issues. But there's a fourth one that I would add to it, and it links again the science and the arts. And it's Pascal, l'infiniment grand et l'infiniment petit. And in science, it's nanoscience versus systems of systems, where you see how everything fits together in whether it's planetary systems or biological systems or traffic systems. And then the tiny nanoscience. In the humanities and social sciences, we have that same small and large. We have the individual and then social groups facing big issues around the world. That's what Derek de Kerkhoff talked to in his book, The Skin of Culture, years ago. It's how communities around the world have to get together to solve problems. And the humanities and social sciences are essential in that linking of how you solve the problems of the world and how they affect each individual. And it is just as important as in science. And if we can sort of link to those four themes in a really positive way, I'm sure that we will be successful. And in 10 years from now, they're going to be saying, my goodness, 75 years when they celebrated it, that was the beginning of a decade of incredible things.
Okay, Noreen, what do you think?
What she said.
So I want to actually go back to this point about crossing disciplines, and I think it's more than thinking about interdisciplinarity within a social science, arts, and humanities context. It's about breaking it out and thinking about interdisciplinarity across the whole university. You know, Dawn, you mentioned one option might be advocating for a chief scientist or someone who would be focused more specifically on learning, or perhaps more focused on humanities and social sciences. I actually come from a province, Quebec, where there is a chief scientist, and the chief scientist represents the full gamut of research activities in Quebec, the Trois Fonds de Recherche du Québec. And it's very interesting because Rémi Quirion is one of Canada's leading, one of the world's leading neuroscientists. He's actually turned out to be an incredibly passionate and effective advocate for research creation, for humanities research, for social sciences research, and for the whole principle of breaking down boundaries across all the disciplines. So I guess one of the questions that I would put on the table right now is to what extent the Federation is interested in federating beyond the social sciences and humanities and engaging in a way that Roseanne mentioned with the science community, with the STEM community, with the health community, and break down some of those additional boundaries that exist.
Remember, in the 18th century, the word philosopher meant scientist. The word mathematician meant philosopher. So we can just go back to an 18th century core definition of the terms. And if you are for the progress of knowledge, if you are for the resolving of major issues, you are a philosopher, scientist, a humanist, the whole thing.
I think it was when I was president, or it could have been right before or after, probably just as I was ending, we took up the challenge of branding again and rebranding, and put out there the possibility and potential of moving from humanities and social sciences to the French, sciences humaines, and going to human sciences. And the community just kicked back. Nope, that's not where we're going. That's fine in French, not good for English. And I found that rather disappointing. I thought that was a move in the right direction, partly to bring these cultures together, and thought it would be a very creative way in English of signaling something about ourselves. Maybe we can return to that at some point, but it's interesting how much resistance there was to doing that.
Thinking about what your proposal was, it's probably easier to get the science officer to understand that they're for all science and that knowledge and human and social sciences are included than to get another cabinet set up, another ministry set up.
Yeah.
Might be slightly easier.
Yeah.
Let me think about the question directly, Graham, if I may. And I want to use an example from Green College, where I'm currently working. The college's mission is to promote interdisciplinarity. And there are 100 graduates who are residents in the college, and they're selected so that they represent the whole range of disciplines and fields in our university. So it's a wonderfully vibrant community. One of the things we've done from the beginning for the last 20 years is promote thematic series of lectures. Currently there are 7 actually ongoing at the moment, but let me highlight 2 as a way of us thinking about how the Federation might move forward. One of them is, the label is Arctic Wise. So the focus is on the Arctic from every possible viewpoint, from the indigenous viewpoint, from the geologist viewpoint, whatever you might think of, from the sociologist viewpoint and so on. Another is the Next Urban Planet, looking at the how urbanization, that of course as we know is just increasing, the graph is phenomenally steep as our world becomes more and more urbanized, what that means for individuals and what it means for a sustainable future. I'm reminded of one of the first projects, and it came up in the video. It was the focus, and of course at that point the councils were funding research. They stopped doing that when we had the Canada Council and SSHRC. But at that point, one of the first projects was this interdisciplinary project looking at the Canadian North. And in a similar way, I would suggest Arctic Wise, our project in the college, is a very similar view. I think the Federation should be thinking about, looking ahead, identifying these interdisciplinary or interdiscipline themes, I would call them, and bringing together humanist, social sciences, and indeed any other disciplines that are relevant into that discussion. And that discussion could then be a conversation, of course, that government is also included in. I think the potential is enormous.
Okay, this is a perfect time to talk about bringing other voices into the discussion. So I want to invite Stephen to come back to join the colleagues at the front here. And I can't help but notice when, or remember when Noreen was talking about branding, that the current brand of the Federation is about ideas, no matter where those ideas come from and what ideas can do to make a difference in the world. We want to throw this open for questions and comments from the floor. And I just point out il y a des micros à chaque côté de la salle. Si vous préférez poser vos questions en français, sans problème. Meanwhile, while you're thinking of questions or comments to make, maybe I'll just take advantage of the fact that Don was talking a little bit about specific interdisciplinary programs on his campus. Stephen, you're a former university president. Roseanne, you're currently a university president. Noreen, you're a provost. how's it work breaking down these boundaries between disciplines on campus? What's the role of the university to help enable that process to happen?
I'm just absolutely fortunate to be at Carleton University because it was started off as an interdisciplinary university with faculties that are interdisciplinary. And when we started our strategic plan a few years ago, we said that was our focus, to reinvigorate it. And in the last 5 years, they've created 28 new academic programs that don't exist in other universities that cross the disciplines. And it's extraordinarily exciting. I remember reading in the Chronicle for Higher Education a few years ago that at Harvard they invented one interdisciplinary course. It was literature and the law. And they said the air was fairly crackling with excitement as the faculty got together and discussed it. Oh my goodness, if the air is crackling at Harvard over one course, just think how exciting it is at Carleton University. Unbelievable. So that was my PR for the day.
Message delivered.
I think it's a big challenge, and particularly the Dean of Arts Memorial is here, so she knows. We talk about this all the time, trying to provide the leadership to change from a 19th century model, very discipline-based, very narrow. Memorial was founded really very much as a colonial university in that model, to a much more fluid sense of learning and research. And we are moving, as many of us in this room at universities know, their own universities are attempting the same thing. That's where students want to be. That's where graduate students certainly want to be. Our interdisciplinary programs are thriving, but urging the somewhat traditional-minded faculty members to let go a little and allow more fluid structures, to break down some of those walls and silos. It's a long process in university time, glacial time, to make change. And you have to, as we all know, as a senior leader at a university, you can't be seen to be, just coming down with 2 tablets from Sinai saying, "Thou shalt not," because then you're just, you confirm, your evil nature by having gone to that side.
2 tablets that give you a headache and not cure it.
Yeah, exactly. And so, it's a leadership challenge, how to get that buy-in from faculty, because sometimes I see it as senior leadership with students on one side and faculty members on the other. It's a gross oversimplification, but I'm sure you all know what I'm talking about. And how to get everybody on board to see the potential in relaxing some of those old institutional models. We have a program that's very interesting at Memorial called Coasts, and we're tapping into the Arctic and cold ocean research and technology, and all those letters speak to those nouns, but the S at the end is society. And our president and our team has been very insistent on that, bringing geographers, bringing sociologists, anthropologists into that major research project. I think there's a lot more going on at our institutions these days about that than there was when I was president of the Federation.
Stephen, you want to comment?
Very briefly, I would only add 2 observations. I'm currently heading an interdisciplinary school, and I see the central challenge as relating to how it is that appointments are made within universities. So I'm now living the difficulty of trying to figure out how to bring people to work together when many of their appointments are going to be first considered, and then they're going to be evaluated after appointment on the basis of narrower disciplinary themes than they're able to pursue in a interdisciplinary program. So that's just a very fundamental challenge that I think we all face with the existence of departmental structures and tenure systems. The second piece I would add is we see that playing out in the Federation as well. So we talk a lot about interdisciplinarity, but for example, trying at the Congress to create space for interdisciplinary or cross-disciplinary dialogue proves to be very, very difficult because each of the associations needs their space and often is not particularly open to the flexibility that Noreen commented upon that would be required in order to have more interdisciplinary conversations. So, you know, we talk a lot about this. We're not delivering that well, in my view, other than Carleton, obviously. I think there's just a lot more tough-minded thinking that we have to engage in if we're really going to make progress.
Okay, thanks, Stephen. You've been very patient with your question. Maybe just could you introduce yourself before you...
Yes, absolutely. I'm not sure if this is working at all.
Yes.
It
Yep.
is? Okay, fantastic. I'm Sandra Lapointe. I'm representing the Canadian Philosophical Association. I'm delighted by everything that's been said so far, and I believe that our members will be completely on board. I'm especially enthusiastic about the prospect of encouraging interdisciplinarity, but I have some worries. So I'm going to say why I'm delighted first. I'm delighted because it's interesting to see how, as I believe Roseanne was saying a little bit earlier, in the 19th century even, we thought of sciences as humanities, and in the last 150 years, what has come to be known as humanities and social sciences is the result of a process of specialization and division of the disciplines. Of course, we philosophers, we like big questions. We like to know what is the mind, what is language, and it's clear that we will never be able to answer these questions if we do not mobilize also scientists, psychologists, cognitive scientists, linguists. So it has to be an interdisciplinary project. And we're, of course, looking for ways to address these concerns. My worry is with the fact that it's fine to think in terms of interdisciplinarity, and we have to, because otherwise it's not going to work. We're not going to find, we gatekeepers of truth, philosophers, we will not find the answers. So, but how do we deal with the fact that you can't have true interdisciplinarity if you don't have very, very strong disciplines? We need the specialists who are addressing the very fine point questions. And if universities are in this framework where they want to hire people who can do interdisciplinary, well, what about the traditional disciplines? Don't we need them still? And I don't want to say that I think we do. I think right now we do. I don't know how it's going to be in 20 years, but specialization is a very important thing. There's a reason why we're so specialized today. So how do we balance specialization, which we need, and interdisciplinarity, which we also need?
All right, Stephen and Roseanne are both raring to go on that one. Stephen, you want to start us off?
I actually agree with you. My own view on this is that interdisciplinarity is not about hiring people who are themselves, quotes, interdisciplinary. I actually think that's extremely difficult to achieve. There are polymaths in our world who are spectacularly good.
Could you give us names?
at interdisciplinary work that's entirely internalized. I actually think the more interesting way to think about this is by bringing people who do have, yes, specific areas of expertise into constant communication with each other. So in my view, the problem is departmental structures as opposed to intellectual categories.
Right.
And I think that what we do need to hire people with an esprit ouvert, who want to communicate and talk and share and frankly battle it out. I've spent the last 15 years of my academic life engaging with international relations scholars. I'm an international lawyer. And I'll tell you, it's been bloody hard. I actually often don't understand what people are talking about, and vice versa. But in my view, it's been worth the effort because I am actually, at the end of the day, learning much more about how I think the world works than I would have if I had sat in my comfortable space and not pushed those barriers. So I think we need to break apart the structures. We need to break apart appointment processes to allow for more flexibility, but I don't think it's reasonable to expect of all individuals that they become internally interdisciplinary.
Roseanne?
My answer is networks and the Federation and Congress and the associations that belong to Congress. When I started out as a university professor, I thought, oh my goodness, this is so wonderful. I will be in the academy every day. I will be able to discuss ideas with my colleagues, and I will talk to them about the texts I'm reading, and it will be so exciting and inspiring, and this is wonderful. And I get to the university, and there's nobody else that's reading the books that I'm reading. They're all, there were other people in the French department, I agree, but none of them were in my century. And, I was by myself. And so I had to be interdisciplinary, crossing over the centuries, and then with the English department and the Spanish department and the Russian department. And, I found other people in my century out there in other fields. I found sociologists I like to work with. But it was at the Federation and we started the Canadian Society for 18th Century Studies because I wanted to find other people that studied the 18th century. We came together in networks that way outside the university. And I think it's going to always happen. When we hire people in the university, I can't hire 5 international specialists in one kind of law. I'm going to get one and another one. And so this Federation provides that background and network and place to have that conversation that we need. And the campus itself is the interdisciplinary ground.
I agree. I think, the networks are enormously important, and so multidisciplinary, transdisciplinary work is enormously important. And I think there always will be the disciplines. But I think we also should start thinking in a different way. And I keep using this concept, interdiscipline, purposefully in the way that I mentioned earlier that Harvey Graff is using it. It does seem to me that what have emerged over time are new interdisciplines. These aren't places where you've got disciplines working together in a multidisciplinary way. You've got people who are interdisciplinary in the sense that they have created cognitive science. They've created literacy studies. They've created urban studies, whatever it may be. And I think there's room for that, and I think we should, as a federation, be encouraging it, by the way. I think we should be looking at what's developing, encouraging it, sponsoring it, at the same time as sponsoring the type of network, multidisciplinary work, the thematic work, that indeed has been the basis for the creation of probably 50 of the 80, I'm exaggerating, maybe 40 of the 80 associations that attend Congress. They've emerged out of these networks, and they create their own association, their own society, and that's very valuable too. And of course, alongside both of those, the continuing work of the disciplines.
Thank you. Just to be clear, I understand. My worry was the following. If we put too much emphasis on the disciplinarity, the interdisciplinarity, without and also emphasizing to whoever we're lobbying, the government or the administrations in our universities who completely misunderstand us systematically if they're not themselves humanists, we're not making clear what we mean by and what is required for true interdisciplinarity. And then it leads to deans deciding to hire people who can do everything without being able to do anything. So it was just my worry, but thank you very much.
And for any deans in the audience, present company excluded. David?
Yeah, David Phipps from York University. I'd like to build on the concept of networks as an enabler of interdisciplinarity. And a place that we have that supports that is the Networks of Centers of Excellence. And to be qualified for a full network, you need to hit at least 2 of the 3 federal funding councils as the members of your network. And I'd like to say, why not all 3? And because the big challenges that we do face as a society really do have natural sciences, engineering, health, human sciences, and social sciences as elements of those. As an example, NeuroDevNet is an NCE focused on childhood neurodevelopmental disorders, and I've got the pleasure of being the lead for knowledge translation for that group. And they include education outcomes, employment outcomes, but health outcomes and mental health outcomes, and some of our researchers are designing assisted devices out of the engineering space. So why do we have only 2 of the 3 councils as required in the NCEs and not have NCEs by the time you get to that size of $5 to $6 million a year for up to maybe 15 years? Why not all 3 of the councils? And then what would be the role of the Federation in advocating for that change with the NCE Secretariat?
Good question.
Anybody want to venture an answer?
Why not? Yeah, something to think about.
Okay, so that's the yes, why not? So what would be then the role of the Federation? What could the Federation do to enable the why not?
On pourrait parler avec CRSH, évidemment, pour encourager une certaine pression à cet égard. Et peut-être il faut relier la communauté de NeuroDevNet, d'autres choses comme ça, pour encourager une approche plus entière à cet égard, probablement.
I think it's tremendously important. Of course, the problem at the beginning was that there was no place for the humanities and social sciences in the networks of centres of excellence. We had to struggle mightily hard to get even one at the beginning, if you remember. So I think there ought to be more networks of centres of excellence in the humanities and social sciences. And then, of course, I think you're right. It would be wonderful if we could move to try networks.
Okay. So back to the other side.
Good morning. My name is Ron Friedman from Research InfoSource, and I'd like to describe myself as an applied social scientist. I'd like to make 2 observations about this morning's discussion. Excellent discussion. Now that we've entered the sunny uplands of evidence-based policymaking, I just want to report to you on a project I did for Shirk a couple of years ago, looking at social science and humanities research funding in Canada. And the bottom line is that the rate of growth, I'm talking federal government now, for social sciences and humanities research funding has exceeded that of natural sciences and engineering and life sciences. So congratulations to Noreen and her predecessors and successors, because guess what? It worked. You have got more money, believe it or not. Second point I want to make relates to the role of the Federation itself. The Federation for the Humanities and Social Sciences is really misnamed. It is, in fact, the Federation for the Academic Humanities and Social Sciences. I want to remind you that there is a parallel universe out there, and I'll be exploring this in my talk this afternoon. There's a parallel universe of applied social sciences and humanities organizations out there in all of the fields with which you are associated and affiliated. And if you really want to expand the scope and scale and impact of the academic contribution to social sciences and humanities, you have to start a dialogue with that community, and that dialogue is missing now.
Thanks.
Carlos Wano, Affaires étrangères, commerce international. J'ai une question concernant les efforts de recrutement à l'extérieur. Lorsque vous renvoyez des universités à faire des recrutements à l'extérieur, vous faites dans des unités atomiques, chaque université essaye de se placer comme, en étant une telle marque de commerce ou l'autre. Mais je me demande si, à ce moment-ci où les étudiants potentiels qui viennent de l'extérieur ont plusieurs choix de plusieurs pays, y a-t-il un rôle pour la Fédération pour peut-être aider à faire un amalgame d'une façon telle que lorsqu'on essaye de vendre la marque de commerce des sciences, d'innovation, d'humanité, des sciences sociales à l'extérieur, pour peut-être trouver un mécanisme pour que puisque les institutions postsecondaires travaillent ensemble lorsqu'ils vont à l'extérieur du pays, pour précisément donner le choix de, pas une institution telle ou l'autre, mais un pays entier qui a beaucoup de choses à offrir dans les deux langues d'ailleurs.
All right, question around branding and the competition between the larger ensemble of social sciences and humanities versus the individual branding of universities externally. Anyone want to take up that?
Encore, la réponse est pourquoi pas. Une excellente idée, mais il faut aussi penser que le personnel est très restreint et limité. Alors il faut vraiment qu'on choisisse les buts qu'on pourra atteindre. Et il ne faut pas prendre trop de choses en même temps. Alors, si on décide de faire ce genre de marketing et de recrutement pour les sciences sociales et études humaines, il faut peut-être laisser quelque chose d'autre en friche, à ne pas développer pour le moment. Alors, c'est une question de priorité, et ça, c'est le groupe actuel qui doit décider.
Thanks, Roseanne. Sir, would you please introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Chad Gaffield, and it's just wonderful to be here, and thank you so much. It's great to hear you all. I just wanted to ask you, though, to benefit from your presence today, to ask you a couple of questions that have struck me a lot in the last year and a bit back on campus. Because this morning's been very much about the notion that there's a world of continuity over the centuries, this has been an ongoing struggle, and that it's about communication. How well do we articulate the value of what we do and why we do it? And that's absolutely true. And a little bit of enthusiasm now about the moment. This is a real chance for us. And so I want to start with a little word of caution. In 2006, one of the reasons I started at SSHRC was a rumor in the city that it was going to be closed down, and there was good evidence for that. And I thought to myself, and people said to me, Chad, really, is that how you're going to end your career, closing down SSHRC? But being the historian, I immediately thought to myself, and I just want to say it, there is no correlation in Canadian politics between political party and support for the social sciences and humanities.
Yes, correct.
Thought. Okay, two other things in terms of what's new and different. Back on campus, and the first one is financial. Back on campus, in 2006, when I left my fine history department at the University of Ottawa, about 1/3 of our courses were taught by part-timers. And this was considered fine. We live in la grande ville, la capitale nationale du Canada. On profite de toutes les institutions, y compris les musées dans la ville. So we had people from all over the place. It was great, really enriched our curriculum and so on. When I went back, 2/3 of our undergraduate courses were taught by part-timers. And I'm now in my esteemed role as chair of the BA committee for the Department of History, mounting a program for next year where I think will be about, regular profs will be about maybe not 40% of the undergraduate program. So something's happened there, and it's got me real concerned. And we know this from many things, so I just want to raise that one. The other one is something that's preoccupation for me, and I think it's the heart of all of this at some level, and that is the development of the digital age. I don't think we've said digital this morning. And so my question is around, to what extent are students, society, the role of universities, the nature of what we do, in the way we think about that, the business models, the whole package, really something that we've got to focus to a greater extent on. And that is different. I don't think it's technologically driven. I think that there are, as you know, conceptual drivers to this. But I do think it is raising questions about which I think the social science and humanities have a world to say. And so how do you think that dossier, those two dossiers, financial and digital, how does that situate in terms of themes like interdisciplinarity, international, public engagement, and so on, because it seems to me, while those things have been around a long time, what's happening right now, I'm not sure this time is different, but je pose la question. Thank you.
Thanks, Chad. Noreen?
I'm going to go 1, 2, 3 as quickly as possible. Just to the first point, you're right, there might not be correlation between political parties and support for the agencies, but that to some degree speaks to your false modesty, because we did think you were inheriting the Titanic, and you had a lot to do, I think, with preventing that catastrophe. And it's becomes so important to communicate with political leaders, to persuade them not to do, for instance, what they did do to the CBC. So because I work very actively in support of public broadcasting, I've always watched these two parallel worlds that we manage, and largely through your and your team's leadership, to keep Shirk whole and even better funded, as Ron said, than we even ever imagined. So just put that out there, not to suck up to you too much, but I do think that that correlation might have been borne out if you had not been there. The second point, we are facing, it seems to me, a crisis. Nobody has used the term here, but in our social sciences and humanities faculties and our arts faculties, enrollment is tanking. Students do not want to take our courses, do not want to take our programs for lots of reasons we can talk about, some of which has to do with technology and the delivery models that are very tired, have not been refreshed, have not been inviting enough, and partly because there's all kinds of market and parental pressure on students to be much more focused in terms of vocational pathways. And we don't have enough conversations, I think, in our faculties, or enough appeal in our delivery to be stemming that tide, which is really rather serious, and it's going to challenge university leaders about how to keep funding at the same levels those faculty. Some are closing down in some places. Programs are now finally, after years of talking about this crisis, finally collapsing. So I would link that to the third piece, which is, and I totally agree with you, I think there's a conversation happening in society that we have not yet engaged in about technologies. You may or may not know, but Universities Canada has invited presidents and provosts to a 2.5 day meeting in Vancouver in a couple of weeks to talk about this. I don't know whether you're going, but I'm going, and I had to plead to get my CIO, my Chief Information Officer, to come with me. My president's not interested, I'm interested, and I said, all of us presidents and provosts, we haven't got a clue what we're talking about for the most part. We have a sense we have to get our act together and talk about some future forward thinking about this, but we don't necessarily are not equipped to engage with those questions. I'm a little disappointed in the program. The editor, or one of the senior editors of the Globe and Mail, is speaking to us. Why? Why, I wonder? There are other people who I think we should be listening to, but I'm going, and it seems to me it's the beginning of something at least that perhaps Universities Canada is trying to speak to. So I'll tell you about that later, but I think it's an absolutely urgent question, and it's a challenge to the communities to pick this up.
Thanks, Noreen. We're actually up close on time, so I'm just going to ask Stephen, Roseanne, and Dawn if they have a quick response to some of the points that Chad raised as well. Stephen?
Huge questions. First off, I tried to be very clear that we have to be careful not to over-imagine a future that is actually sunny. That's not inevitable. And we have to work at that. I couldn't agree with you more. I think your second and third question, as Roseanne was hinting at earlier, and I think Noreen just said, are really closely related. We heard last night at the end of the Shirk Forum from Stephen Downs, who was all about these issues. And what I think was most important there, to pick up Roseanne's comments earlier, is networking. I would add distributed knowledge and non-hierarchical. Put those three things together and you don't have a university. So there is something absolutely fundamental happening. You were, of course, as always, right. And I think that we actually have to think from the perspective of the social sciences and humanities how it is that we reimagine the role of a professor and we reimagine the role of a classroom. And I can't go into all the details there, but we're not doing that well enough. I will say that. We are simply not reaching all of the pressure points that I think students are going to be bringing to us, and I think we do need to think about this as a community.
So I'm going to say I'm not going to the conference because I teach a class, and I am using technology in the class in a way that I've never done before. I've hooked up with some of my former PhD students in Turkey and Maryland and British Columbia, and we bring their classes together with my class, and it's an awful lot of work, and it's a little bit hard for me because I didn't do this before. That's why I don't have time to go to the conference. But last night, one of the students said to me, "This is the best class I ever had in my entire life." Wow. It made me feel so good. And we can all share that good feeling. And it is important that we push ourselves to do that bit of extra, to make ourselves into that next century, the next way of thinking and doing and teaching. It's using the technology, reaching out around the world, dreaming big and small, and being interdisciplinary. All of that will bring back the excitement of what we do. Part-time teachers, okay. Hertzberg won the Nobel Prize. He was a part-time teacher at Carleton. Not so bad. Yes, we have a lot of part-time teachers. But when I started teaching, my load was 5 full classes plus the noon hour class that was offered to the rest of the campus for French conversation. Faculty don't teach that many hours. They get paid a whole lot more. My starting salary was $5,000 a year. It's a lot different today. And we have to say, okay, it's different. Why is it different? And how do we use those differences to make it a really exciting and wonderful experience for our students?
I was involved in this last little while, last 5 years or so, in helping plan a new building at UBC. And one of the questions we were being asked, I was the head of the department at that point, and we were being asked to think about what the classroom should look like in this new digital age. And, it struck me as we toured the campus, by the way, looked at all of the latest things that were happening, some of the stuff I didn't know about, just putting a text that would be read from a screen up onto the big screen and so on. I mean, simple things I know, but I'd not used them before. In any event, the point is, as we envisaged the classroom of today, it clearly is a place where you've got connections for computers, desks spread around, or at least stations spread around, screens all around probably the room, and a seminar or a class where there'd be this mix of video, speech, interaction, and so on, using all of the wonderful technology that's available to us. I have to say, out of, I think we had 6 classrooms to plan, we were only able to put that into effect in one of them because of financial. This sort of classroom costs a lot of money. So I think one of the things we have to think about in our institutions is the extent to which we are willing to allocate resources to spend on the new technology for the teaching. I just want to go back to the part-time. I mean, I think it is just sleeping. I mean, it's like an iceberg. There's all of this happening, employment stuff happening beneath the surface, and it's a time bomb. It really is a time bomb. All of the sessional, all of the part-time work at the same time as we, as universities, are producing far more PhDs than we've ever done in the past. There isn't the jobs for them to go into. At the same time as the participation rate in our universities, of course, has gone up to what Martin Troe talked about as a universal level, over 50% of the 18 to 24-year-olds. So the expectation in our society is that most young people are going to go to some form of tertiary education, quite properly, quite rightly, and it means a society presumably where there will be more participation in the democracy and so on, in our democracy and so on. But if we're doing that, then we've got to also be willing to set aside the resources to employ people full-time on tenure track in our universities and colleges, excuse me.
Thanks, Don. Now, I realize there are a couple of other people who had questions. We're going into a break period now, so maybe if you'd wanted, just approach the panelists individually and ask them. And of course, this is just the beginning of a very fruitful day ahead. But please join me, first of all, in thanking our four panelists, Don Fisher, Rosanna Rote, Noreen Golfman and Stephen Toop, for their work on behalf of the Federation over the years, for their commitment to the Federation, to the vision of the social science, humanities, and arts going forward, and for their participation this morning in this panel. The other thing I would just say is that we're going to reconvene in this room half an hour from now at 11:30 for a keynote address by Wab Kanu, and there will be a book signing taking place near the registration table over the course of the next half hour. So somebody mentioned networking earlier on. This is your chance, half an hour to meet with people and connect. So thank you all.